Archaic Records.
Dreaming, I am yours, you are mine, you are what you are, you make it hard. Tearing yourself away from me now, you are free, and I am crying. This does not mean I don't love you, I do, that's forever, baby, yes, and for always. I am yours, you are mine, you are what you are, you make it hard. Something inside is telling me that I've got your secret.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee, and today I've got a very special episode for you, as I will be taking a look at the 1971 live epic Four-Way Street by American supergroup Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Now, my relationship to this band pretty much goes all the way back to the womb. My dad is arguably one of the biggest Crosby, Stills, and Nash freaks in the world. And to me, this band really is sort of the soundtrack to my childhood. Whether it be riding around in my dad's car or going camping. Chances are, if we were not listening to the Giants on the radio during the summer, we were listening to Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And really so many of my favorite memories as a child are somehow related or tied back to this band. And even now, as a man who's pushing 50 years old, when I listen to this band, it still makes me feel like a little kid riding around in my dad's car or going camping out at the beach in Northern California, or really any of the things that we did as a kid that bring back like positive memories. And I was really fortunate in the sense that both of my parents were really into music. Both of my parents had really good taste in music, generally speaking. But it really was Crosby, Stills, and Nash that to me stand out above all the other music that my parents listened to as sort of the constant ringing in my ears, pleasant ringing in my ears as a kid. And this past week, I was back home in Northern California, and I had the opportunity to see my dad, which is always such an amazing thrill for me. My dad and my dad really is one of my best friends in the entire world. I know that can sound hokey saying that, but it really is true. My dad and I have a relationship that I would not trade for anything in this world. And my dad and I tend to get into these conversations that are they tend to be really epic and huge. And like me, my dad is like a total music dweeb. That's probably partly where I got it from. But my dad and I tend to go out for places and have coffee or have lunch somewhere. And we tend to get into these like really just epic conversations where we get really like locked in on each other. And at least speaking for myself, everything else around me kind of just turns into a blur because we're just really like locked in on one another. And usually we end up talking about things like music or life or family or baseball or sometimes politics. But usually it always reverts or comes back to music. And this past week when I was back home in Northern California, my dad and I got on the topic of Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And I kind of asked him, how did this become your band? It's something I'm always curious about with people, whether it's a band I like or not. How did your band become your band? What turned you on to it? What was the appeal? And beyond that, like, what is your favorite album? What is your favorite song? As just being a total music loser like I am, that's just the kind of stuff that I find infinitely interesting. And my dad and I got into this big conversation this past week talking about Crosby, Stills, and Nash. He was telling me a lot of stuff about the band that I didn't know about and kind of what turned him on to it. And of course, my dad grew up sort of towards the tail end of the Vietnam era. And this type of music just really touched him in a way. And he told me that when he first heard this band, he got turned on to them by a cousin, I believe he said. That just nothing had ever resonated with him in that way. In particular, David Crosby. So the next morning, after my dad and I had this really epic conversation, I also asked him, at the time I said, well, what's your all-time favorite album? And I think I kind of knew what his all-time favorite album was. But he did mention that his all-time favorite album, not only by this band, but of any artist, is Four-Way Street, the 1971 double disc live album. And I realized, as we were talking about this album, that I actually did not own this record. There is some Crosby, Stills, and Nash stuff that I own, and I have for a very long time. But I did not own a copy of this record. My dad lives in a town called Chico, California. You may be aware of it. It's up in Northern California, about 2 hours north of Sacramento or so. And after we had this dinner, we hung out, had one of our big epic talks. My dad and I were talking about this record at length. The next morning, I went out and didn't have a lot of free or alone time on this past trip to California, but one morning I found myself with a couple free hours, and I ran into downtown Chico, into our one local record store called Melody Records. And I ran in on the mission of finding a copy of this record to bring home with me. And I have to say, it was very important to me that I found this record in Chico, just because it is where my dad lives. And I've always, associate that with my dad, and the fact that this copy came from Chico is very important to me. And real quick before I go on, I have to give an incredible shout out to our little record store out there in Chico, California, called Melody Records. Man, that place is the goods. If you ever find yourself in Chico, California, for any reason, you have to stop by Melody Records. I absolutely love that place. When I was a young adult in Chico, we had 4 thriving record stores within the little downtown area. Of course, there was a tower. There was a place called the Underground, which was this very cool, for me, it was my church, basically. It was kind of like the punk rock, nasty, gross record store. They had a head shop. They sold bootlegs and t-shirts and posters. It was kind of like a rock and roll superstore. Man, that was like my church back then. I love that place. And then we had another record store called Melody Records, which was good too. I used to go in there a lot. But what's ironic about the fact that this store, Melody Records, is the last one standing, at least in my hometown, is at the time, and again, I was a young kid. I was 18, 19 years old before I ended up moving down to the Bay Area. To me, that was the least cool store there was. That's where the dads hung out. That's where all the old hippies went to buy their, Grateful Dead and Crosby, Stills, and Nash records. But it is the last record store standing in Chico, ironically. And man, they are absolutely amazing. That store, they have just done it right. I could have easily dropped $200 in there this past week. But I did go in there, and I did find a few other things for myself. But I did want to find a copy of Four-Way Street in Chico. So I want to give a shout out to Melody Records. That place is the goods. I can't say enough awesome things about that place. The girl that was working there was awesome. And the place is packed. Every time I go in there now, the place is packed, which warms my heart and makes me feel good. But the girl working there was absolutely awesome. Actually, her and I had a conversation about this record. And as I will get into in a minute, I actually wasn't overly familiar with this particular record. But she was sort of going on and on about it. And I did find what she was saying very interesting, although until recently, until this past trip, I actually didn't know a ton about this record specifically. But this is the one I picked up in Chico this past week. As you can see, it is a little bit, the cover is a little bit weathered, but so am I. But this is an original 1971 original pressing. As you can see, the sleeve is a little bit dinged up. It's been a little bit, this thing has had some love, but I love it. I actually absolutely have fallen in love with this copy of this record. And actually the vinyl itself is in really good shape. So whoever had this record before me, although they kind of let the cover get a little bit weathered, the vinyl plays well, actually. And I love one thing I love is when I buy old records like this. And again, this thing is a 1971 original. This thing's been on the planet longer than I've been, which is saying a lot. I can't help but wonder, who had this record before me, the joy and pleasure they got out of it. Somebody obviously got a lot of use out of this record. As you can see, the bottom is kind of fraying. It's got the nice ring of shame. And one thing that's curious about this particular copy is if you can see back here, right here, there appears to be a couple little pieces of dried candle wax. Or at least I hope it's candle wax. I hate to imagine what else it could be. But I love getting old records like this. I love thinking about who had it before me, the enjoyment they got out of it. Again, was this part of some weird hippie orgy with like the candle wax and all that? But it's mine now, and I absolutely love it. And again, this was a record I didn't own physically until this past week when I went back into my hometown and was talking to my dad about this record. And so I dedicate this episode to my dad. I know he does watch these. Maybe he's a glutton. What can I say? But it was great to find this. It was just great being back home, seeing friends and family back in my native Northern California. Now I'm back here in Nashville, talking a little bit about Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And again, I just picked up this record this week. Crosby, Stills, and Nash, as you probably know, formed in 1968 in Los Angeles, California. The band famously formed at a party which was being held by Joni Mitchell at her house. Now, legend has it that David Crosby, who had formerly been in the Byrds, and Stephen Stills from Buffalo Springfield were sitting on the couch having kind of an impromptu jam session when they busted into a song called You Don't Have to Cry, which caught the ear of former Hollies member Graham Nash, who happened to be at the party because he was banging out Joni Mitchell at the time. Those are his words, not mine. Actually, I'm kidding. I just made that up. I can't imagine Graham Nash using the term banging out. I'm sure he probably has never said that in his life. I don't think it would work, Graham Nash using the term banging out. But anyway, as the story goes, Graham Nash heard Stephen Stills and David Crosby singing the song called You Don't Have to Cry, approached the two of them, asked them to sing it again. And as they did, he added the high harmony, joined in adding the high harmony. And as David Crosby himself said, from that moment on, all three of them knew what they wanted to do with the rest of their lives. And the band does have that unique sound. I don't think there's ever been a band that's ever sounded like Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And basically from that point on, history was made, more or less. And in May of 1969, the band released their self-titled debut album on Atlantic Records. This is considered by many people to be one of the greatest American debut albums of all time. Now, I actually really love this record. Again, this is a record that reminds me a lot of my childhood. Now, my dad actually just recently told me, of course, it has this iconic album cover. I think this is one of the greatest album covers, at least in its era. But my dad told me recently, actually on this last trip when I was back home in California, that the band really loved the album cover, but what they did not like about it was the fact that they were sitting in the wrong order, because as you can see, it's Nash, Stills, and Crosby. So what they wanted to do was go back and reshoot the same concept on the cover, except they wanted to be sitting in the proper order. Now, they went back a couple days later to redo the photo shoot for this and found that the house had been completely torn out, which I actually think is kind of a blessing. I think that this is one of the more iconic and eye-catching album covers of the late 60s. And it's funny because I think if you would have gone back and tried to kind of recreate this, I just don't think it would have worked as well. This is an amazing album cover. I really love this record. Again, a lot of people will tell you that this is one of the greatest American rock albums of all time. Now, for many years, there was controversy as to who was standing in the back window on this album cover. I remember for a long time people saying that it was Neil Young. Now, even as a younger person who didn't know any better, I'd never thought it was Neil Young. I don't think that looks like Neil Young. But as it turns out, it was the band's drummer, Dallas Taylor, who the band did want to include on the album cover in some fashion. They considered him to be a full member of the band. What's interesting about this picture, though, is that he had to be superimposed in that window. At the time, he was actually not standing in the window because this house was completely boarded up. Like I said, the band went back a few days after this photo session to reshoot the iconic cover, and the house had been completely torn out. So nobody's actually standing in that window. That was a superimposed or whatever they did back then, because this door was actually completely boarded up. And I don't know, that chair should be condemned. Oh my God. Anyway, it wasn't long after that, the release of their self-titled debut album, that Stephen Stills approached David Crosby and Graham Nash with the idea of inviting his former Buffalo Springfield co-conspirator Neil Young into joining the band. And it was famously Graham Nash who was the most reluctant. Graham Nash wondered what Neil Young could possibly add to this band that had already created one of the most unique sounds in the music industry and just put out one of the most celebrated albums of its generation. But Graham Nash was open to the idea of meeting with Stephen Stills and Neil Young for dinner. And as Graham Nash himself said, he basically bluntly asked Neil Young, "Why should we invite you to join this band?" And Neil Young basically answered with one sentence, or one question, I guess, which was, "Have you ever heard Stephen and I play guitar together?" And I guess that pretty much shut up Graham Nash, because he was just like, "Oh yeah, okay." And it wasn't long after that, in August of 1969, that the band played their second show together at this little music gathering up in upstate New York called Woodstock. Get it? Little music gathering, because it's so well known. Anyway, famously, the band played their second show ever in August of 1969 at Woodstock. A concert that is a performance that's absolutely amazing. One of my favorite performances in the entire Woodstock movie itself. You can actually go back on YouTube and you can find their entire set, and man, it is killer. The band were definitely firing on all cylinders, as they say. An absolutely electric performance at Woodstock. If you're like me and you're kind of an old piece of gristle and you love looking back on old television and old music interviews, there's a really cool, you can find it online, but the band, right after Woodstock, appeared on the Dick Cavett Show, who interviewed the band, and that is one of my favorite interviews of the band ever. You can tell they're just still completely blown away by the Woodstock experience. And they're a little bit snotty and sarcastic and, kind of what you expect from the guys at this point in time. But if you haven't seen the Dick Cavett interview with the guys from Crosby, Stills, and Nash, it's on YouTube. I would definitely recommend it. But in March of 1970, the band returned with their sophomore album this time, including Neil Young, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, with the 1971 album called Deja Vu, 1970 album Deja Vu. And man, this is a really great album as well. When I was back in Chico this past week, I asked my dad, again, he's the biggest Crosby, Stills, and Nash freak I've ever met, if he had to choose this one or this one, which would he take? Of course, his answer was Four-Way Street, but that wasn't the question. But of these two, which ones would you take? Again, this album was thought of as being just an incredible landmark performance, and I think most fans and most critics think that this one is even better. My dad did say of the two, he would take Deja Vu. I guess I'm in the minority on this one because having listened to both these records my whole life, and I've owned both of these records most of my adult life, I actually like the self-titled debut slightly better, but I mean, Deja Vu is incredible also. But I think I would take this one over it just by maybe a pinch. But the band, after that, was riding, as you can imagine, a commercial and creative high. And they decided to take themselves out on the road. And in April of 1971, the band released their first live album, Four-Way Street. This album was released in April of 1971. This album was recorded in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles in between July 2nd and June 2nd and July 5th of 1970. This album was produced by David Crosby, Graham Nash, Stephen Stills, and Neil Young. And this thing comes in at a slender 86 minutes. But I would say despite its slightly rotund waistline, there's really not a lot of filler on this album. This album is pretty entertaining start to finish for the most part. Now for me, like I said, the last two records I talked about briefly, I know those records back and forward. I've been listening to those records my whole life. I've owned those records most of my adult life. But for this record, this is one that I didn't know as well. Like I said, I've never owned a copy of this record until this past week. So unlike a lot of the records I talk about on this channel, including the first two Crosby, Stills, and Nash records, most of the records I've talked about on this channel, I make a point of knowing very well before I start blabbing my mouth. But for me, this one is more of a, kind of a first impression. This is the first time I've really done like a deep dive into this album. David Crosby himself described this as being the greatest live album ever recorded. Now, I'm not really here to disagree with the esteemed Mr. Crosby, but if it pleases the court, I would like to offer into evidence. I would like to offer in evidence to the contrary, if you will. First, I'd like to throw in Exhibit A and Exhibit B. Sorry, Dave. But the interesting thing about David Crosby making a comment like that is I think that David Crosby at one point in time, he really considered the concept of humility. And after looking into it more deeply, he decided that he was against it. Not that he's the only ego in this band. It's funny, this band, you would think of them as being kind of like warm and cuddly, kind of hippies, Haight-Ashbury hippies, but there's a lot of ego in this band. And you could argue rightfully so, but I think that Dave's ego might be like the top. Anyway, like I said, this was kind of my first deep dive into this record. I've heard pieces off of it before, so my opinions on this could change over time, but this is kind of my first impression of it. Like I said, despite the album cover being sort of weathered and beaten up a little bit, the vinyl on this actually sounds really good. So I was very happy about that. Anyway, this album starts with a 30-second kind of breakdown of the song Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. I'm not really sure why they start the album off like that. I mean, it works. It's not a bad thing. I love the song Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. I love the breakdown in that song. I kind of wish they would have just done the full version of that. Maybe not the full 9-minute Woodstock version. But I really love that song. I'm not exactly sure why they started off with that track for the first track of the album. It's like 30 seconds long. But the song Sweet Judy Blue Eyes is a favorite of mine, so no complaints there. After that, the band introduces Neil Young, who comes out, and they break right into the song On the Way Home. This song has a beautiful instrumental intro. Neil Young does the lead vocals on this. Great harmonies when the harmonies kick in. One thing I noticed on this track, though, is that even in the harmony break and the harmony breaks in the song, Neil Young's voice is way out front in the mix. I don't know if that was deliberate or not, but it's a great song. There's a part towards the last third of the song where Stephen Stills and Neil Young kind of like toss the lead vocals back and forth to each other, which is really effective, really great. Again, great harmonies. Oh my God, that's going to be a theme. No matter what Crosby, Stills, Nash record you listen to, that's a theme. The harmonies are just amazing. This is probably one of the better Neil Young songs on the record. I really like this one a lot. The next song is Teach Your Children. I mean, this is just a classic. This is just a Crosby, Stills, and Nash absolute classic. I love this song. Again, this is a Graham Nash does lead vocals on this one, but again, the harmonies, when they go into the harmonies, are just immaculate. They are so tight, you couldn't fit an ant's eyelash in on those harmonies. They are absolutely impeccable. This is one of my favorite songs on the record, and this is one of their best performances on the record. I absolutely love the song Teach Your Children. So you can't do wrong with that, in my opinion. Great version on this record. The next song is Triad. This is a David Crosby tune. Now, there were rumors going around for a long time that this was the song that got David Crosby jettisoned from the Byrds. Now, whether or not that's true or not, David Crosby has always sort of denied that rumor. What he has said, at least in stuff I've read, in interviews I've seen, was it wasn't so much that the song got him kicked out of the band. He wanted the band to do more of his songs. He wanted to be more of a important role in the band instead of just being sort of a rhythm singer and a rhythm player, which is understandable. But this song, one thing I like about this song is, and there's certain parts on the record like that, where the band kind of introduces the song with some playful banter. David Crosby tells a little bit about the song as he talks. It's funny, David Crosby almost sounds like a little kid. He's very timid and almost kind of shy when he introduces this song. But one thing I like about this record, when the band does the kind of like playful, joking intros, was this was a band that would eventually have a lot of negativity around it, a lot of drama, a lot of hard feelings, a lot of nastiness. But on this record, you get the feeling, not only because the performances are so good, but with these little, like, sort of playful intros, you get the feeling that the friendship was still really intact here. Now, I'm kind of a romantic. I admit I'm a dork when it comes to stuff like this. But it's fun to kind of romanticize your band or your bands that you like just being, like, best friends, like us against the world. Now, obviously, intellectually, we all know that usually isn't the case. But on this record, and especially knowing all the ugliness that this band would face going forward, the playful sort of banter and intros is really it's a small thing on this record, and I'm probably overstating it, but it's just really cool on this record. As far as the song Triad goes, I really love David's voice on this song. I love David Crosby's voice. I know people will tell you that Stephen Stills has the best voice of the three core members. I actually really like David Crosby's voice, his solo voice. And the instrumentation of the song is really beautiful. David Crosby is known for having sort of his own unique guitar style, guitar tuning. I actually really like that aspect of David Crosby's music. So for me, Triad is actually one of the high points on this record. Again, he will deny that this is the song that got him kicked out of the Byrds, but that was a rumor for a long time. I really love that song a lot. I think it's a high point on this record. I love his voice. I love his guitar playing. I love his weird, unique guitar style and tuning. The next song is Lee Shore. This song has a great guitar intro. Beautiful vocal performance. This song's kind of slow and melancholic. I like it. The guitar work on this song is subtle, but it's very haunting. I think it's a very good performance of this song. Again, harmonies, man. You can't beat their harmonies in that sense. The next song is Chicago. I mean, what can I say about that song? It is an absolute classic. This is protest music at its finest. Not quite on the level of Phil Oakes, just saying, but this is a great protest tune. I absolutely love the song Chicago, and the performance on this record is very powerful, so I'm a big fan of that one. The next song is Right Between the Eyes. This is a Graham Nash tune. Supposedly, they say on the record that this is the first time the song's ever been played live. I actually really like this song a lot. Of the three vocalists, the three core members, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, Graham Nash has my least favorite lead voice. But I really like this song a lot. And I love the chorus, "A man is a man who looks a man right between the eyes." I love that. I love that song. That's a great song. Again, the song begins with some playful banter and joking. And for me, there's a couple things about this record that are subtle things that I really liked. One is that, and two, there's some like real kind of imperfections on this record that I absolutely love. The next song is Cowgirl in the Sand. This is a well-known Neil Young song. It's not bad. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not, and I never have been the biggest Neil Young fan of all time. It's just sometimes his voice just kind of like hits me the wrong way. As far as Cowgirl in the Sand, the version of it on this record, it's a good performance. It's true to itself. I get real finicky with Neil Young's vocals. I always have. I'm sure you can tell me I'm wrong. Millions and millions of people think that he's great. And it's not that I don't think he's great. I think he's an incredible writer. But his voice to me sometimes, but it's a decent version of the song. Again, I get weird with Neil Young's voice. It's just a personal preference. The next song is Don't Let It Bring You Down. There's another sort of playful banter opening. The band jokes. No, actually, that's not this one yet, but the band, I think it's one of the members of the band says that this song kind of starts off as nothing and then dribbles out to nothing. I do like this song. It's a great instrumentation. I love the lyrics to Don't Let It Bring You Down. I think that is one of Neil Young's best written songs. Again, just Neil Young's voice to me sometimes is like, sometimes I just can't handle it. But I do like the song Don't Let It Bring You Down. I like the opening. I like the kind of banter. Great instrumentation. Again, I'm a little bit with Neil Young's vocals. That's just a personal thing. Next song is 49 Bye-Byes. David Crosby introduces Stephen Stills at the beginning of this song as somebody he's known almost longer than anybody else in the world. Somebody he's had ups and downs with, but somebody he still plays with to this day. I think this is actually one of the weaker songs on the record. I find the piano playing on this record, on this track, to be really kind of like annoying, as I do find Stephen Stills like sort of scatting. Kind of makes my teeth ache a little bit, honestly. I don't really like this song, 49 Bye-Byes. I do like I like the kind of playful banter at the beginning of it. I think this is one of the weaker songs on the record. Again, the piano and the scatting, I don't know. It's kind of embarrassing a little bit. The next song is Love the One You're With. I mean, this song is a classic. Stephen Stills' vocals on this song are incredible. You've heard this song. It's just a classic. No scatting on it, so it's better than the last one. King Midas in Reverse is the next song, Graham Nash song. I think it's okay. So we're entering into an era of the record now where each band member kind of gets an opportunity to shine solo. And this is the Graham Nash song, King Midas in Reverse. I do think that this song is okay. Like I said, I think Graham Nash, to me, has my least favorite of the lead voices. I think the song is okay. It's not super noteworthy. I hadn't really heard the song too much that I was familiar with, unless I'm overlooking it on one of those other two records. It's okay. I do like the fact that the band goes into this part of the record where each member kind of gets to do their own song. They get to shine individually. Graham Nash's is probably not my favorite of the four songs, but the next song is Laughing. It's the David Crosby song. I really love this song. Like I said, I really love David Crosby's voice, his lead voice, and I love his guitar playing. I think that Laughing is a very good track. It's much better than King Midas in Reverse. And I just really like this song a lot. So I would definitely say that is much better than the Graham Nash track. The next song. The next song is probably my least favorite song on the entire record. This is the Stephen Stills song, Black Queen. He tells a story about growing up down in Louisiana, a place I used to live at one point in time. And he talks about how there used to be a black man that he lived near who would sit on his porch playing the blues, and Stephen Stills should leave it to that guy, because this is not a very good song. It's a very vanilla blues. The guitar work is good, but I just don't like the song. I don't like Stephen Stills' vocal performance on it. Again, trying to find something positive to say about it. I think the guitar work is really great. I'm not a big fan of like vanilla blues. And I get that was a big influence on Stephen Stills, especially growing up where he did. But man, that song is, that's rough, honestly. That's a rough one. And the next song is the Neil Young song. And maybe this is me projecting a little bit because I'm not the biggest Neil Young fan in the world. And I know that he's got an ego that goes out to like here. But I can't help but think that Neil Young approached the other guys and said, all right, you guys each got 3 minutes. I want 10. So the Neil Young song is a medley, a 10-minute long medley, by the way, of Loner, Simming Girl, and Down by the River. I mean, they're all fine renditions of those songs. I just think it's funny. Again, I'm probably projecting this onto Neil Young just because I'm not the biggest fan. But I just assume he's like, oh, you guys got 3 minutes? Well, watch this. So he does 10 minutes of medley. It's all right. It's, again, I'm not the biggest Neil Young fan. I can't be. The next song is Pre-Roads Down. At this point in time, the band ditch the acoustic guitars and they bring out the electric equipment. And I really like this song. It's rockin'. I will say that on the electric part of this record, which I do like musically, one thing that I noticed when I was listening to this record is during the electric segment of this show, or these shows, at least on this record, when the lead vocals all sound really good, but when the band goes into the harmony vocals are way back in the mix. They kind of get drowned out a little bit. I don't particularly like that, but I really like the electric segment on this record, and Pre-Roads Down is great. Pre-Road Downs, I should say. The next song is Long Time Gone. This is a classic. I absolutely love this song. Dave's voice is amazing. The band is in full rock mode. I absolutely love the song Long Time Gone. I always have. Even as a kid, I just absolutely love this song. I can't go wrong with that one. That is good. Next song is Southern Man. The band, again, they open with some joking banter. They joke about how this song is really long, but they're going to slow it down for you. They do. This song is almost 13 minutes long. Again, the harmony vocals are completely drowned out in this version. I like the song Southern Man. Like I said, I'm not going to sit here and give Neil Young a hand job. I'm just not really the biggest Neil Young fan, but the song Southern Man is good. Again, the harmony vocals are just way drowned out on this, especially on this recording in particular. They're way in the back. You can hear that it's going on, but you can't understand anything they're saying. The next song is Ohio. This is the goods right here. I absolutely love this song. Of course, the song was written about the Kent State situation. I absolutely love the guitar intro to this song. It's just like excruciating. As he plays those notes, the guitar itself sounds like it's an agony just playing those tunes. I absolutely love the song Ohio. I think that's one of the best songs on the entire record. That's just a classic song of all time. For this era of music, that's one of my all-time favorite songs. I absolutely love the song Ohio. Amazing. The next song is Carry On. I like the song, but man, it's 15 minutes, man. I mean, again, maybe this is like me coming from more of a punk rock fan background, but 15 minutes. I mean, that's not a song. That's an afternoon. But again, it's not a bad song. It's just like, oh my God. I could have run to the grocery store and back, and they're just still sitting there blabbing. And the album ends with a song called Find the Cost of Freedom. I love this song. Again, beautiful song. Great vocal performance. Again, the harmonies on this song are so tight. You couldn't slide a piece of paper in there. This is a beautiful song. Real simple, short, great way to end the album. But a really great song. Kind of one of the higher notes, honestly, on the record. And actually, I don't know if this song is even recorded live because it sounds more like a studio version. I could be wrong. But I absolutely love this song. But anyway, like I said, that was kind of my more of a first impression take on the Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young live album 4-Way Street. My dad's favorite album of all time. I think it's very, very listenable. I think that some of their performances on here were really great. And like I said, this is like, and I'm not saying that this to be dismissive, but one of my favorite things about this record is the kind of playful banter, kind of some of the vocal imperfections. I really love this record. I thought it was actually very listenable. Now, I wouldn't put it above these two. I would still listen to these, especially this one, kind of every day over 4-Way Street. Like I said, I picked this up in Chico this past week. It's my dad's favorite record of all time, and it was really fun listening to it over the past couple days and thinking about him and thinking about the big epic conversation that we had about this record. And both my dad and I, when we get talking, we just get so into what we're saying, and he really sold me on this. So like I said, I wanted to go out and find a copy of this in Chico and honor him and listen to it. And I know he watches these videos. I don't know why. I don't know why anybody does, but he does. So I wanted to give him a little bit of a review, my thoughts on his favorite record of all time. This is kind of off the beaten path that I've established for this channel anyway. But all in all, I would say it was very enjoyable. Not quite as good as the two studio albums that preceded it, but not bad. As most of you know, David Crosby passed away this past January 18th of 2023. And for me, that was something that I took very hard. I know this is something that's kind of probably my issue, but sometimes I get too wrapped up into these musicians' lives, and I get really upset when things happen. But I did take David Crosby's death very hard. For one thing, like I said, just growing up around Crosby, Stills, and Nash, David Crosby was always my dad's favorite member of the band. He's probably my favorite member of the band as well. I know he wasn't always the warmest and most cuddly character in the history of rock and roll. But I did take it hard. So, it's just something that sometimes I have to get over a little bit, I guess. But if you are interested in a couple of David Crosby related things, I'd like to recommend for you real quick. The first one would be David Crosby's autobiography, Long Time Gone. Again, this was a book that my dad had when I was in high school. I sort of borrowed it without him knowing one time, and I read it when I was in high school. I've had my copy of it for quite some time. This is a really excellent read. Of course, it's got all of the grossness and debauchery you could possibly imagine with it being David Crosby. But I really like this book for the look into the music and the creativity, and going back into things like the Byrds. If you are going to read this book, though, you might want to use some tongs because it gets pretty nasty. And if you do find a copy of this book somewhere, I might suggest that you keep this thing in a plastic bag, because I'm pretty sure that police dogs can smell this thing from 1.5 miles. One more thing I'd like to recommend for you really quickly. This record also came out in 1971. Also David Crosby related. Again, it's interesting how prolific some of these artists back in those days were. I mean, some of these guys just pumped out amazing musical material as if it was the hot poops after a Taco Bell bender. I mean, David Crosby, 1971, he put out this record, If Only I Could Remember My Name, and I really love this record a lot. I remember I found this record in a dollar bin, somebody just chucked it into the dollar bin at one of my local record stores. And I had to get it just because of my relationship with Crosby, Stills, and Nash and David Crosby as a kid. Like I said, David Crosby was always my Dad's favorite member of the band. He's my favorite member of the band. And to this day, I can't look at David Crosby or see an interview with him without thinking of my dad. It just always, it's the association that I will always have with David Crosby. But I found this album for a bone in a bargain bin. And this has some good jams on this record. I mean, let alone just for the song Cowboy Movie, this thing is worth a bone. But it has the song Laughing, which is on Four-Way Street, which I talked about. What Are Their Names? I really like that song a lot. And the song with no words. Holy smokes, that is a good cut. But my favorite song off this record is definitely Cowboy Movie. Oh my God. That thing is worth $1 all by itself. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. Let me go down a little nostalgic memory lane as my childhood, the soundtrack of my childhood, with these 4 dirt bags from California, England and Louisiana, and Canada, I guess, really, if you want to break it down. David Crosby was technically the only Californian. Anyway, thanks so much for checking out this video. Remember to support your local record store. Go out and listen to some Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Check back on this channel every week for Morrissey Monday, my weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. And again, thanks so much for checking this out, man. I'll talk to you next time.